Hey guys, Laura here. I'm here to do my February reading wrap up, and I'm gonna do this video in two parts. So right now it is Saturday, February 23rd. So I'm going to give you guys the things I've read up until this point, and then on Thursday night, hopefully, or Wednesday night, I will just do the tail end of this video because I feel like I will probably read a little bit more, but I want to get as much prepped filming done as I can. So this month is super short. It just is a shorter month, but I did actually read quite a bit, and I actually read a lot of contemporaries, which in Valentine's Day, the month of Valentine's Day, I always do like to do. So let's dive into it. I also did have a week off this month, which was really, really nice for reading. But yeah, let's dive into it. So the first book that I wound up finishing was an audiobook, and that is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I actually bought a physical copy of this book a couple of months ago at the Barnes and Noble to like buy two get one free. So I actually do have a physical copy of this book, but I really wanted to read it. I was feeling a little bit I just felt I needed a little bit more of creativity in my life. So I felt like I wanted to listen to a nonfiction book. Actually really liked it. It's definitely a book that I would reread again, and I loved how she really like talked about creativity. And as someone who is a theater teacher and also has someone who's in theater and does productions, sometimes you just don't feel creative. And I felt like she had a really good guidepost to like, you know, going to live a very, very creative life. And my creative life and your creative life might be totally different, but I really did enjoy it. And it was like a 5-star read. I was really impressed with it. It was a super short listen, so something I would definitely wind up listening to again and again. But yeah, I actually really liked it, and it was a great way to start off the month. This is a small note. In my March TBR video, I'm going to tell you guys how I have changed using my TBR cart and using my TBR jars, just because I found a system that I think will finally work and I'm really happy with it. So I'm going to talk about that in that video. But the first physical book that I read in February was Light Between Worlds by Laura Waymount, and this actually came from one of those cups. This came out I think it came out in October, and I got it at BEA last year. But this is actually a historical fiction fantasy novel about these two girls, Evelyn and Pippa, and they basically wound up getting sucked into a fantasy world, and it's the aftermath of when they come back from this fantasy world. So it's a little bit like the Home for Wayward Children series by Sean McGuire, but I really liked it. I think I was a little bit more connected to Pippa's storyline than Evelyn's storyline, and it was structured in a very similar way to The Sun Is Also a Star by I can't remember the name of it. Not The Sun Is Also a Star. It's the one about the twins, and by Jandy Nelson. I can't remember the name of the book, but it had a very, very similar structure. Like, one half of the book was told from Evelyn's point of view, and you got flashbacks through hers, and then you got Pippa's, and then flashbacks when she was in the story. So I actually really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought the fantasy world was super interesting. I really liked it. I liked how we had a nice balance. And I just liked the dynamics between the sisters, and it was just a really compelling read. I definitely felt a little bit more connected to one character than the other, but I thought it was a really solid representation of the impact of a fantasy world on people, especially in this time period. I think was super interesting, and the way she structured the book was super interesting. So I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I would definitely read more by this author in the future. And also, if you're a theater teacher, this book does have a lot of like poetry. There's a lot of poetry addressed in it. There was like dual romances in this book, which I thought were really interesting, and I was equally invested in both. But yeah, I actually really liked it, and I would definitely read more by this author in the future. The next book that I wound up reading is it's no longer called Breathe. What is it? It's called Only a Breath Apart by Katie McGarry. But this is the first book in her new series. This came from Tortine, and I got this from ALA from my friend, but then the cover changed and then the name changed too. But I actually really enjoyed this book. I gave this book like 4.5 stars. I thought the ending was like a little bit rushed, like the last like 20 or 30 pages, I felt like I would have wanted like a little bit more information, or even to use this part in like one of the sequel novels to see these characters again a little bit more fleshed out. But it basically follows Jessie and Scarlett, and they are one of my favorite tropes in YA literature is redemptive love, or love that like you come back after a tragedy has happened. And that was kind of how Chevy and Violet was in the Thunder Road series, and that's how Isaiah and oh well, no, they weren't the romance, but like Isaiah and Beth originally, that was kind of like their dynamic originally. But I really love this book. This book deals with a lot of hard issues. It deals with abuse. It deals with dealing with grief. It was a very compelling read, and I really loved being in Scarlett's head. Scarlett's the daughter of a man who is basically physically and emotionally abusive to her and her mother, and it's just so compelling being in her head and watching her deal with her mother. I thought that was really interesting, but oh my god, Jesse. Jesse's like my new book boyfriend. I love Jesse. He's dealt with a very, very hard life, and this book starts off when his grandmother passes away, and he is going to inherit this farm, but he's on a tribunal where 3 people at the end of May will decide if he gets to keep his farm. And it was just a really, really good book. It took me a long time to read this. This book took me a while, and I think because it was a really like emotional read, I had to put it down and put it back up, and that was also like show drama or school drama was keeping me a little bit more distracted. But it took me a long time to read it, but I really enjoyed it. I just wish that she would have fleshed out the ending a little bit more, or would have put it into one of her other books, because we're definitely going to get another book in this series, and I think I know who the character will be. But I really like the group of friendships that we know. It was just a really, really fun, it wasn't a fun read, but it was like a really important read, and I really enjoyed it. So I definitely gave it 4.5 stars, and I'm really excited to see what book 2 is and which character that book will follow. I was definitely on a contemporary kick this month, and the next book that I wound up reading was Famous in a Small Town by Emma Miller. Now, let me preface this by saying that I have loved every other Emma Mills book that I read, and I just got First and Then from the library. I loved Foolish Heart. I really liked Adventure's End, and I had watched people review this book. I had watched Jane Lindsay, I had watched Super Space Chick, I had watched Alexa Loves Book, and I had watched Novel Inc. So they all kind of gave me a warning that this book was not their favorite. And I will admit, it was definitely not my favorite. And I really normally love Emma Mills because she writes such complicated like relationships, and she does such complicated everything, but it's all like such tightly wound into such like a really nice story. And even if there's like a mystery element or something like that, it's just all so tightly wound. I thought that all the elements individually were okay, but they just never came together to make like a cohesive story. Like the friendship group, I wasn't that invested in, honestly. Like the plot, like about the Megan Pleasant getting her to perform and the twist at the end. There was a couple of twists in this book that just really were like, I had to reread it a couple of times to make sure that I was like reading it right. I didn't realize that there was something that happens at the end of the book that like, if I was to reread it now, I think it would make a little bit more sense. But it wasn't as a cohesive story as like I wanted. And I felt like it wasn't just tightly wound, and it wasn't like polished. I felt like it was like an unpolished book. Thought the concept was interesting. I just wasn't that fond of the execution, which makes me a little bit sad to say. So I did only give it 3 stars, but I still love Emma Mills as a writer, and I'm super excited to see what she does right next. The story just did not work for me overall, and I'm hopeful that her next book, or when I do get a chance to read First and Then, it will work for me. This book just was not my favorite. I would definitely recommend this as like a library read. Pick it up from your library before you buy it. I liked it. I didn't love it. I'll say that, but I did wind up giving it 3 stars. The next book that I wound up reading was Similars by Rebecca Hanover, and this is a science fiction mystery thriller, but it's definitely a more realistic science fiction novel than like outer space science fiction. But it basically follows this girl named Emma, and she goes to an elite boarding school, and the summer before this year, her best friend Oliver winds up committing suicide. And then the first day of school, there are these 6 clones that have been cloned from her classmates that wind up coming to her school. It's a really, really tightly wound story. Like, this mystery was super compelling. I read it over the course of like 3 days, and it's big. It's I think it's just about, it's almost in 360 pages. So it's a pretty large book. The print was also really big too, which might have helped. But I really liked it. There was, if you watch my reading vlog, which should be up before this, I think it went up on Saturday, or yeah, Saturday I think it went up. There was a twist in this book I really did not want to happen, but I actually liked it when it did happen, if that makes sense. Go check out my reading vlog because I talk a little bit more about it there. But I really love the characters in this. I love the relationship with the clones. I love the ethical issues that this book brought up. And in our culture and our society, it reminded me a lot of the refugee crisis. And I'm not sure if that's what Rebecca Hanover had in mind, but it just felt like, are these people human? Like, if they're cloned, are they really human? And it just was really, really interesting. I was really compelled. I flew through this book. I read it so fast. And I'm really excited for book 2. I was really compelled by it, really fascinated. I really loved her storytelling. I really liked how all the mysteries kind of like connected to each other in the end. And I really liked Emma as a main character. And I just, the highlight of this book was the clone, the conversations that were had about clones and the ethical issues and what makes you a human and what makes you an American. I thought that was like super interesting and super compelling. And I really am excited for book 2 and will definitely be checking it out. And I wind up giving this book 4 stars. The next book that I wound up finishing was The Adventurers Guild by Zach Lauren Clark and Nick Eleftheriou. And this book was pitched to me as Dungeons and Dragons meets like Percy Jackson. Like, that's what it was pitched to me, and it's totally accurate. And it basically follows these two guys named Zed and Brock, and Zed is a half elf in a society where elves are not like the most popular things, and Brock, who's like a merchant. And in this society, at a certain age, you basically become an apprentice for a guild. And these two boys have very high, lofty expectations. One wants to be a wizard and one wants to be a merchant, but then they are requested or forced, I would say, in some instances, to join the Adventurers Guild, which is a group of people that basically protects the society from monsters. And it was just like a kind of a setting about that. It was a great starter novel in the series. This book went very fast, and you met a lot of characters in the first like 30 pages that I was really confused on who you were talking about. So there was a little bit of confusion, which is why I only gave it like 3.5 stars. But I really loved how this book was told from only the male point of views. Both leads were males. I loved how it was a really, really fast-paced adventure. I loved how it also had some diversity dynamics, which is actually super compelling. I definitely want to read book 2 because it kind of ended on like a cliffhanger, and I actually have it. It's over there. I got it from BEA last year. But I actually really liked it, and I found it to be a really fascinating read. If you have like reluctant readers that like video games, this might be a good book for them because it definitely seemed to me like a video game, and I really enjoyed it. So that's my thoughts on The Adventurers Guild by Zach Lauren Clark and Nick Eleftheriou, and I wound up giving this book 3.5 stars. My second audiobook for the month of February was Briar's Book by Tamora Pierce. This is the concluding book to the first series. Like, I think it's like the Circle of there's like a bunch of little series, but there was like a first 4 books, and this is the last book in that series, and this is Briar's book, the only boy in that. And I always love boys in those series, and he's definitely my favorite character. So getting his book was so nice. I just loved the conclusion to this series. It definitely like raised the stakes, I think, and Tamora Pierce does that really well. She definitely respects your heroes, but I think she also like gave some levity to the situation, and I was really excited to see how it would turn out. It was a really solid conclusion. All the characters had moments, which I think was really important, but you could definitely understand that this was definitely Briar's book. I really liked it, and I actually do have the first 2 books in the sequel series, which I hope to start soon, but this was a really good read. I gave it like 4 stars, and I just loved being in Briar's head. I love the audiobooks for this series so much. Not all of them are audiobook, like not all of them are done as audiobooks, which is sad, but the ones that are, I highly recommend. And I wound up giving this book 4 stars. Back. It is Thursday, and tomorrow is the first day of March. So I am back. I definitely did not get a lot of reading done this week, and I will slowly tell you why. I live on Long Island, and I commute to and from work every single day, and on Tuesday night, there was a very, very, very bad train accident on my line that killed 3 people and just had a lot of confusion and chaos in the commuting, and it just added so much stress to my life, and I was exhausted for the past 3 days. So I didn't listen to as much stuff. I really was just re-listening to much older podcasts that I had listened to before because I really couldn't focus on anything. And it wasn't anything that like I could do. Like I felt like I was like always late for stuff, and I just don't like that feeling. So reading fell a little bit more by the wayside, but honestly, I was so stressed out over the past couple of days with commuting and being late that I just didn't want to read. However, I did wind up finishing Crown of Midnight last night, which I actually really liked. I really love this reading, and I really, really love this conclusion, or not conclusion, the second book in the series. I thought that it dived in to Selena very interestingly, and I liked all the point of views that we got. There's a situation in this book that really always breaks my heart when I read it, but this book was definitely a 5-star read for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it and cannot wait to start Heir of Fire. Heir of Fire is the book that I stopped reading the series on, so I'll be curious if I'm compelled to keep going once I read it in a quicker time fashion, especially now that I've basically read these back to back. But yeah, I'm super excited to dive into that book starting next month. And yeah, so I did start reading a few other things. Like I started reading the first Circle Opens book, but honestly, I was so unfocused that I just stopped. I also started listening to Wizards of Once, and I was so distracted that I stopped. So yeah, so that's basically my reading wrap up. It definitely was a really good reading month, even though the month was so short. But that train accident and the breaks and everything just really put a damper on my reading. Hopefully, I'll have a much better reading month in the month of March, but it is a much longer month. I don't have any weeks off that month either, and I do have to get a lot of stuff for my show done, but hopefully I will be able to read at least 5 books. That's my goal, and that's the books I'm going to choose from, but I will talk to you guys later for another video.